Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you manage infrastructure right now, you already know the painful truth. That 8-character password with a mandatory exclamation point, it just isn't cutting it anymore. Today, we're breaking down the evolution of identity and access management. We're going to dive into the exact authentication mechanisms securing today's modern enterprises and why going entirely passwordless is our inevitable future. Since we're all IT pros, security engineers, and DevOps specialists here, we're going to go ahead and skip the basics. This deep dive is a dedicated blueprint, so we're getting straight into the actual technical frameworks you need to master modern authentication and truly lock down your environments. All right, here's our structured roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The password crisis, 2. Multi-factor authentication, 3. The passwordless future, 4. Advanced IAM concepts, and finally, 5. An implementation blueprint. Starting off with Section 1, the password crisis, and why it's a fundamentally broken default. Passwords have been our default for decades. But man, right now, they're an absolute nightmare for IT departments everywhere. Just look at this. A staggering 80% of data breaches involve weak or stolen passwords. I mean, think about it. Relying on human beings to manually memorize complex cryptographic secrets, it's literally like leaving the master key under a digital doormat. It's an incredibly inefficient, multi-million-dollar liability. So with the stakes that high, how do we actually fix this? How do we go about securing enterprise data when the primary lock on the front door is completely busted? Well, the answer lies in how authentication has evolved. Which brings us to Section 2, multi-factor authentication, the current standard. MFA is basically the current gold standard. It's the essential band-aid over the password wound, right? It acts like multiple independent locks on a door, forcing users to combine distinct categories of proof. You need something you know, like a PIN, something you have, like your phone or a hardware key, and something you are, like your biometrics. Combining these drastically shrinks your attack surface. But listen, not all MFA is created equal. There is a very strict hierarchy of security here. SMS, one-time passwords, they're really low tier now because they can be so easily intercepted. Authenticator apps are definitely better, but the absolute pinnacle for the enterprise is the FIDO2 hardware key. Because these keys are cryptographically bound to specific domains, they are 100% phishing resistant. Moving on to Section 3, the passwordless future, and eliminating that single point of failure. Because honestly, even the best MFA is just a stepping stone. The true paradigm shift is ditching passwords completely. And if you're wondering why, just look at this massive number, 99.9%. That is the percentage of account breaches Microsoft prevented simply by moving to passwordless sign-ins. By relying exclusively on biometrics and hardware keys, the password isn't just hidden behind the scenes, it literally does not exist for a hacker to steal. It's gone. To really grasp why this is practically bulletproof, let's walk through the FIDO2 cryptographic handshake. When you register a key, your device creates a public-private key pair. The public key goes to the server, sure, but that private key stays physically locked on your device. When you log in, you prove you possess that private key cryptographically. And the absolute genius of this? The secret is never actually transmitted across the internet, so fake websites and phishing attacks are mathematically neutralized. All right, Section 4, Advanced IAM Concepts and the Zero Trust Mindset. Once you've got that bulletproof identity verification established, you can start building structurally sound architectures. We're moving totally away from the outdated perimeter trust model. You know, the idea that if you're inside the corporate network, you must be safe. The new reality is zero trust. It means exactly what it sounds like. Never trust, always verify. Every single user and device is continuously challenged, no matter where they're connecting from. Now, to do that at scale without driving your employees absolutely crazy, we rely on context-driven security. Modern platforms are constantly calculating risk in the background, based on your location, your device, the time of day. This lets us implement what we call smart friction. Logging in from your usual desk, you get right in. But logging in from an unrecognized device in a high-risk country, boom, the system automatically triggers conditional access, either blocking you entirely or demanding that extra hardware key. And that brings us to Section 5, Implementation Blueprint, your practical roadmap. Okay, so now that we understand the tech, let's equip you with a concrete plan for your own environment. But before you touch any servers, you've got to consider your compliance drivers. Whether you're handling healthcare data under HIPAA, payments for PCI DSS, or user data under GDPR, they all explicitly mandate strong layered authentication. So modernizing IAM isn't just a cool security flex, it's absolutely crucial for keeping you legally compliant. Here is your actionable step-by-step roadmap. First up, conduct a ruthless audit of your current state to map out every single authentication touchpoint. Next, stop the bleeding. Enable MFA immediately, starting with your highest risk targets, like admins and developers. Once you're secured there, you can run a passwordless pilot, handing out FIDO2 keys to your eager early adopters. And finally, layer in those conditional access policies, and just continuously monitor and optimize the whole experience. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to remember the evolutionary trajectory we've walked through today. Passwords are dying. Multi-factor authentication is our current standard, but passwordless authentication, that is the future. Adopting a zero-trust mindset is absolutely non-negotiable for any enterprise moving forward.
Great things take time to build. Grab a coffee, lock in, and stay with me until the end. Your future self will thank you for investing this time today.
Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're joining us. Today, we are doing a high-stakes reality check on enterprise security. We're going to zero in on a huge blind spot sitting right in the middle of networks worldwide. And yeah, probably even your own. You see, we spend so much time and money making sure people are exactly who they say they are, but we completely drop the ball on managing what they can actually do once they get inside. By the end of this explainer, you're going to have a crystal clear grasp of enterprise privilege management, why it's failing so spectacularly, and how the best in the business are finally fixing it.
Let's kick things off with a story that's basically the stuff of IT nightmares. Picture this. Just last month, a contractor at a massive Fortune 500 company clicks a phishing link. Now, we all know humans make mistakes, right? It happens. But here is the truly catastrophic part. When that account was compromised, the attacker didn't have to break through any crazy additional firewalls. They didn't have to string together some complex zero-day vulnerability. Why? Because that single contractor somehow had access to the entire financial database. Someone had literally handed them the keys to the whole kingdom, not just the tiny slice they needed for their specific project. If you don't get this right, you aren't just leaving a door unlocked, you're essentially handing attackers a golden ticket to your entire infrastructure.
So here is our roadmap for solving this today. We're going to start by untangling authentication versus authorization. Then, we'll dive into the privilege problem, break down enterprise access models, define the principle of least privilege, and finish up with some real-world implementation.
Let's get right into Section 1, Authentication versus Authorization, Identity versus Action.
You know, these two concepts get mixed up all the time, and honestly, that's where the trouble really starts. Think about authentication first. It answers just one simple question. Who are you? You're just proving your identity. When you type in your username, your password, or hit that multi-factor authentication prompt on your phone, the system is purely verifying that you are in fact the person you claim to be. Okay, now switch gears to authorization. Authorization answers a totally different question. What can you do? Just because the system absolutely knows you're Alice from accounting, it doesn't mean Alice gets to read the CEO's private emails or mess around in the source code repository. Authorization is about controlling exactly what resources you can touch and what actions you're allowed to perform.
To really cement this, think of it like being at the airport. Authentication, that's the TSA security checkpoint. You show your ID, you prove you're a real person with a valid reason to be there, and boom, you get into the terminal. But authorization is your boarding pass. Being inside the terminal doesn't mean you can just wander onto any plane you want, right? Your boarding pass strictly dictates whether you're getting on Flight A to New York or Flight B to London. Getting your authorization dialed in for an enterprise environment isn't just a nice-to-have, it's absolutely critical.
Moving on to Section 2, the privilege problem. Let's talk about permission creep. To really see how this happens, let's look at a totally normal everyday scenario. Meet Sarah. In month 1, Sarah gets hired as a junior database administrator, and IT gives her the standard DBA role. That role obviously comes with pretty broad access to all the databases so she can jump in and get to work. Fast forward to month 6. Sarah's team is growing fast, and she needs to get her new hires up and running like yesterday. The easiest, most frictionless way to do this? Just tell IT to give them the exact same DBA role she has. But here's the catch. Those new hires only actually need access to 2 databases, not all 8 of them, yet they get access to the whole shebang anyway. This perfectly innocent workplace behavior creates what we call permission creep. It is happening in your organization right now for sure, and it's the absolute fastest way to turn a minor security blip into a front-page data breach.
And honestly, the danger doesn't just stop with the people still working for you. Check out this stat, 30%. According to industry surveys, in organizations that don't have rigorous offboarding procedures, a whopping 30% of departing contractors leave behind active ghost accounts. Just think about that. A contractor comes in, gets extensive access to do a job, the project ends, they leave the company, and literally nobody remembers to turn off their access. You have people completely outside your organization just sitting on active credentials to your most critical systems.
All of this leads us straight to what we call the lateral movement highway. Here is exactly how an attacker exploits these unmanaged privileges. Step 1. An attacker compromises a junior developer's account using a really simple phishing email. Step 2. Because of that permission creep we talked about, that junior developer accidentally has production database access, even though they only ever needed read access to the codebase. Step 3. The attacker doesn't even need to hack anything else. They just smoothly move sideways through your systems, entirely undetected, simply using the excessive permissions that the account already had sitting there. These aren't hypothetical scenarios, guys. This is exactly how modern breaches unfold in the real world.
All right, Section 3, Enterprise Access Models. Let's look at some structural solutions.
So we've got two main heavyweights to talk about here. First up is Role-Based Access Control, or RBAC. This is by far the most common approach. You're defining access based strictly on job functions, like network engineer or application developer. The real beauty of RBAC is its simplicity. When someone changes jobs, you just swap their role rather than manually tweaking 50 individual permissions. But then we have attribute-based access control, or ABAC. Because RBAC can be a little rigid, ABAC steps in and looks at context. It lets you say something like, okay, developers can access this database, but only during business hours, only from a corporate IP address, and only if they've completed their security training this year. It is definitely more complex to implement, no doubt, but it is highly flexible and incredibly powerful. This is exactly what modern enterprises like Microsoft and Google are pushing toward.
And building right on top of those models is kind of the ultimate paradigm shift: zero trust architecture. Zero trust operates on a very simple, pretty ruthless mandate: never trust, always verify. Instead of granting someone access just because they logged in successfully this morning, the system actually verifies every single access request. Even if Sarah is a fully authenticated senior engineer, every single time she pings that database, the system asks, is she on an approved device? Is the network trusted? Is this access pattern normal for her? If Sarah suddenly tries to download a massive data table from a country she's never even visited, the system immediately challenges her, or just flat out denies the access.
Which brings us to Section 4, the principle of least privilege, the ultimate golden rule.
This principle is absolutely the bedrock of cybersecurity. It basically says you only give users the absolute minimum permissions they need to do their specific job. Exactly what they need, and literally nothing more. No just-in-case access. A junior DBA shouldn't have the power to delete production databases. They just need to run backups. A marketing coordinator doesn't need to see the entire global employee directory, just their team's contact info. And why does this matter so much? Because it severely limits your blast radius. If a contractor's account gets stolen, the attacker can't drain your financial data if that contractor only had access to a folder of basic invoices.
But actually enforcing this, man, it is tough. Mostly because human nature just gets in the way. People naturally ask for more access over time, and managers, just wanting to be helpful team players, will say, yeah, sure, I'll give you production access just to make your job a little easier. That right there is how breaches happen. To stop it, you have to implement formal and, yeah, sometimes inconvenient processes. We're talking strict request forms that require a real business justification. You need robust approval workflows, mandatory quarterly access reviews, and my favorite, automatic access revocation, also known as standing access. Imagine having database access for exactly 30 days, and if you still need it on day 31, you have to request it all over again. Yes, it adds a little friction, but it utterly destroys permission creep.
So I want you to just pause and think about this for a second regarding your own setup. How often does your organization actively review user access? Is it quarterly? Annually? Never? If an employee switched from sales over to marketing 2 years ago, do they somehow still have access to the sales CRM? If you don't know the answer to that right now, your network is vulnerable. Okay, Section 5, Real-World Implementation at Enterprise Scale.
Look, we all know the hurdles here are massive. First off, you're trying to manage this kind of complexity across literally thousands of systems and tens of thousands of employees. Then, you've got the heavy audit and compliance burden. If you're in regulated industries like healthcare or finance, you can't just look at auditors and say, trust us. You need hard audit logs to prove your access controls actually function. Then there's the constant daily battle of balancing the user experience against security friction. You basically have to make security annoying enough to matter, but not so annoying that your users just bypass it. Because if it is too rigid, you get the fourth challenge: shadow IT. Users are clever. They will find workarounds. They'll start sharing passwords or spinning up completely unauthorized personal cloud databases, creating exponentially more risk for you to deal with.
But it absolutely can be done smoothly. Take a look at a real-world example. TechCorp, a company with 1,200 employees heavily utilizing Azure AD. When a new developer gets hired, HR creates their account, drops them into the software engineers group, and boom, they automatically get their baseline access to GitHub, Slack, and the dev databases. Later on, when they get promoted, they might request production access. The team lead approves it, but it's restricted strictly to read access only. Finally, when that engineer moves on and departs the company, their Azure AD account is disabled, and instantly access to every single system is revoked automatically across the board. One switch disables the whole thing. It's scalable, it's highly secure, and it is exactly what mature enterprise access looks like.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that is quite literally the invisible nervous system for almost every major enterprise network on the planet. We're talking about Active Directory. We're going to explore exactly how it's designed, how it gets so easily compromised, and most importantly, what it actually takes to defend it. Okay, let's dive into this, because to really understand the massive stakes here, you have to realize that Active Directory controls your organization. And I don't mean that in some philosophical, big picture way. I mean, literally. It is the absolute ultimate authority dictating exactly who can log into which computers, who can open specific files, and who can run applications. If attackers compromise it, the entire domain falls, period. The stakes here are just incredibly high. Get this. A staggering 70% of all network breaches start with compromised credentials. Because it holds the absolute keys to the kingdom, compromising Active Directory isn't just some hacker's side quest. It is the fundamental business model for most modern ransomware. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to break this complex beast down into digestible parts. We'll start with the enterprise nerve center, move into how Kerberos authentication works, look at critical security vulnerabilities, discuss defending the directory, and wrap up with the modern hybrid future. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the Enterprise Nerve Center, and understanding AD's true purpose.
Before we even get into the attacks, we really need to clear up a major misconception. Active Directory is not just some simple login prompt or a basic list of passwords. It's actually a massive, centralized database of objects. We're talking users, computers, groups, that acts as the single source of truth for access control. It allows for instant, centralized management. And that extreme convenience is exactly why it serves as the literal nerve center for 90% of Fortune 500 companies.
Think of this architecture of trust kind of like a physical kingdom. At the very top, you have the forest, which is the absolute security boundary. Inside the forest are trees, or connected domains. And the domains themselves are the organizational units where the actual identities live. The absolutely critical feature here is automatic trust between these domains. Now, this automatic trust is incredibly convenient for the IT department, right? But as you'll see in a minute, it is a massive double-edged sword for security.
Moving right along to Section 2, how Kerberos authentication works, our very own Keymaster. We've talked about the structure, now let's talk about access. Fun fact, Active Directory doesn't actually store or transmit your plain text password to authenticate you. Instead, it relies on a brilliantly elegant 1980s protocol called Kerberos. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this forced-up dance. Your computer sends an encrypted hash to the domain controller. The controller then issues a ticket-granting ticket, or TGT. You trade that TGT for specific service tickets to access resources, and then present those tickets to your target. The real beauty here is that your password hash travels exactly once. After that initial request, you're just trading tickets.
Let's look at Section 3, Critical Security Vulnerabilities. The castle walls breached.
Okay, we've established how elegant and centralized this system is, right? But warning, that very elegance creates catastrophic single points of failure. Take pass the hash, for example. Attackers literally scrape a password hash directly from memory to authenticate. They never even need your plain text password because in this system, the hash essentially is the credential. Contrast that with Kerberosing, where attackers abuse the fundamental rules by requesting those encrypted service tickets, taking them offline, and just brute forcing them to crack weak service account passwords. You know, passwords like backup2024!
And then there's the absolute nightmare scenario, the DC sync attack. This is sheer devastation. A hacker essentially impersonates a domain controller and asks for a routine update. The system obediently replicates the entire Active Directory database of password hashes right into the attacker's hands. No joke, one successful DC sync attack and the attacker owns every single account in the entire domain. Game over.
The scariest part, modern attackers don't even need custom malware anymore. They use living off the land techniques, basically abusing native, legitimate tools like PowerShell to hide right in plain sight. From there, they use lateral movement, exploiting those automatic cross-domain trust relationships we talked about earlier to move invisibly across the network. They manipulate groups and escalate privileges until they own the whole domain. Which brings us to Section 4, defending the directory and building a better fortress. So how in the world do you defend a network nerve center that is under constant sophisticated attack? You use the Active Directory tiering model. It breaks down like this. Tier 0 contains your domain controllers. These are the absolute crown jewels. Tier 2 contains your standard users and everyday laptops. The golden rule here is strict isolation. Tier 2 is strictly prohibited from accessing Tier 0. By isolating these tiers, you severely limit the blast radius if a laptop gets compromised, and you can actually reduce privilege escalation attacks by up to 70%. It's absolutely crucial.
Finally, Section 5, the modern hybrid future. Active Directory meets the cloud.
We are now standing right at the intersection of legacy systems and the cloud. On-premises AD is a 25-year-old infrastructure relying on physical domain controllers and Kerberos tickets. Compare that to Azure AD, or Entra ID as it's known now, which is completely cloud-native, designed from the ground up for a remote workforce, and supports modern passwordless access. Now, while a cloud-first approach is undeniably the future, let's be real. Enterprise inertia means on-premises AD is going to stick around in the background for at least another decade.
So the crucial point is understanding the risk of syncing these two worlds together. Most companies run a hybrid environment linked via Azure AD Connect. But here's the terrifying part. If an attacker compromises an on-prem account, that malicious change can literally sync right up to the cloud. Attackers can pivot from some dusty old local server straight into your cloud email or SharePoint. Securing this sync mechanism, like using pass-through authentication, is absolutely vital. Otherwise, a local on-prem breach instantly becomes a massive cloud disaster.
Let's wrap this up with our conclusion, securing the crown jewel. All right, we've covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's bring all these concepts together into some actionable takeaways you can implement right now. First, enforce least privilege. This alone stops 40% of escalation attacks. Second, monitor absolutely everything by sending event logs directly to a SIEM. Third, protect your privileged accounts with extremely strict multi-factor authentication. Fourth, use privileged access workstations, or PAWs, so your admins aren't using their standard daily driver laptops for domain management. And finally, conduct regular audits. Use tools like Bloodhound to proactively map out and eliminate hidden attack paths before the bad guys find them. Visibility and strict access control are literally the difference between a secure network and becoming a breach statistic.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding the hidden mechanics behind those single sign-on systems you use literally every single day to seamlessly access your enterprise apps. We're going to talk about how to stop typing passwords into every single SaaS application and uncover the really fascinating hidden architecture of modern enterprise security. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit the problem with passwords, federated identity explained, SAML, OAuth, and OIDC, the risks of SSO, and finally, wrap up with the passwordless future. Let's dive in.
Section 1. The problem with passwords.
So I want you to just think about your workflow today. Jumping between Slack, Gmail, Salesforce, Jira, how many times were you forced to just stop and prove your identity? Every context switch, every timeout, every new tab. It gets exhausting, right?
Well, for the average employee, it's 20 or more times a day. And honestly, when you extrapolate that across a whole enterprise using maybe 50 to hundreds of SaaS apps, you get massive password fatigue. I mean, nobody can remember all those. So what happens? People resort to dangerous workarounds. They use predictable variations, reuse the exact same password, or, stick a Post-it note under their keyboard, just hoping the janitor isn't some master hacker. And here's the kicker. Every single app stores its own copy of those credentials. If just one of those hundreds of apps gets breached, boom, attackers can use credential stuffing to unlock the whole shebang.
And the IT overhead caused by this fragmented mess? It's absolutely staggering. Just look at this. A massive chunk of help desk tickets, up to 35 or even 40% in a lot of organizations, are totally wasted just fixing forgotten passwords and dealing with lockouts. It is an incredible drain on productivity.
Moving right along to Section 2, Federated Identity Explained.
Okay, to fix this mess, the absolutely crucial thing to grasp is how we separate the back-end architecture, that's federated identity, from the seamless front-end user experience that we all know as single sign-on. Federated identity is your structural concept. Instead of 500 apps storing 500 passwords, you have one single, authoritative source of truth storing your identity. Single sign-on, or SSO, is simply the user experience benefit you get from that architecture. You log in once, and magically, you're in everywhere.
Now, to really understand how this works, we got to define the key players. First, we have the identity provider, or IDP for short. Think of big names like Okta, Azure AD, or Google. This acts as your central authority. Then we have the service provider, or SP. That's the actual application you want to use, like Slack or Salesforce. Think of the identity provider like your home country issuing a single passport, and the service providers, they're like foreign countries that simply trust that passport at their borders, instead of forcing you to get a brand new one every single time you visit.
So, what exactly happens when you try to cross that border? Let's trace the steps. You visit the service provider. It doesn't know who you are, right? So it redirects you straight to the identity provider. You authenticate there, just once. The identity provider then issues a token, essentially saying, yep, this person is totally legitimate. You're then redirected back to the service provider with that token in hand, the application validates it, and you're in. This entire sequence happens in milliseconds, totally behind the scenes, ensuring you're verified securely without the service provider ever seeing, touching, or storing your actual password.
All right, let's jump into Section 3, SAML, OAuth, and OIDC. Now, we're really cracking open the engine room here. This matrix breaks down the dominant protocols actually running identity across the internet. First up, we've got SAML 2.0. Released way back in 2005, it uses robust but, let's be honest, pretty complex XML assertions. It is for sure the undisputed heavyweight champion of legacy enterprise SSO, boasting about 90% adoption in large orgs. Next up is OAuth 2.0, which uses JSON tokens. But crucially, listen to this, OAuth is not about authentication. It is fundamentally about authorization. It's the protocol behind login with Google on Pinterest, letting an app access your resources without ever seeing your password. And finally, we have OIDC, or OpenID Connect. This right here is the modern standard. It brilliantly combines the authorization of OAuth 2.0 with actual authentication, providing an ID token to prove who you are and an access token to prove what you can do. It's literally the direction every single modern cloud application is heading.
Which brings us to Section 4, the risks of SSO. Okay, we need to shift our tone a bit here, because concentrating all your access into a single identity provider, that introduces a massive, undeniable security vulnerability. Look, while SSO elegantly eliminates credential sprawl and password fatigue, it completely transforms your threat landscape. By putting all your eggs in one basket, your identity provider becomes the ultimate target. I mean, think about it. If the IDP falls, the whole kingdom falls.
And trust me, attackers know exactly how to exploit this concentration of trust. They go right for the jugular, targeting the identity provider directly. If an attacker compromises an IDP admin account, that is a catastrophic Tier 0 breach. They can literally escalate privileges to access any connected app in the entire company. No way around it, that's bad news. We also see highly targeted phishing campaigns creating fake IDP login pages just to steal those master credentials. And even if they don't get the password, attackers can scrape computer memory or intercept networks to snatch the active session tokens themselves, completely bypassing the login process altogether.
So how do we defend against these catastrophic breaches? Well, security architects have to be absolutely rigorous. The identity provider must be treated as a Tier 0 asset, literally your most critical system. You absolutely must force multi-factor authentication, or MFA, centrally right at the IDP level. You should also use short token lifetimes so that if a token is stolen, it expires quickly. And crucially, you've got to implement conditional access. Say an employee's token is suddenly being used from a brand new device halfway across the world. The system should instantly flag and challenge that unusual logging. Let's move to our final section. Section 5, the passwordless future. To completely neutralize these credential-based attacks once and for all, modern enterprises are making a massive architectural shift right now. For years, companies have been stuck in these really complex hybrid environments, trying to perfectly sync aging on-premises Active Directory servers with modern cloud identity hubs like Azure AD. Honestly, it creates messy sync windows and incredibly inconsistent security policies. But today, forward-thinking organizations are actively ditching that complexity. They are moving towards simpler, drastically more secure, pure cloud-first identity architectures.
And this shift, it paves the way for the absolute ultimate SSO experience, passwordless authentication. Just imagine a workday with 0 passwords to remember or type. Nothing. Users simply authenticate to their cloud identity provider using Window Hello biometrics, like a quick fingerprint or facial scan, or maybe by tagging a physical FIDO2 security key. They instantly get their tokens and can access everything. It makes systems dramatically easier for users, and here's the best part. Because there's literally no password to steal, it renders traditional phishing attacks completely useless.
Welcome to The Explainer. Look, today we're tearing down basically everything you thought you knew about network security. If you're still relying on traditional perimeter defenses, you're sitting on a ticking time bomb. This explainer is going to completely dismantle that legacy mindset and introduce you to the paradigm shift the powerhouses like Google and Microsoft are using to actually survive today's threat landscape.
There's this quote that just perfectly nails our old mindset. Your security architecture is built on a lie. Inside the network is safe, outside is dangerous. That right there is the fundamental lie of the traditional castle-and-moat model. We've spent literally decades building these massive firewalls, just assuming anything inside the wall is automatically trusted. But what happens when the attacker is already inside? All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the broken castle model, then break down the 7 Zero Trust principles. After that, we'll look at Zero Trust in practice, walk through the implementation roadmap, and wrap up with exactly why Zero Trust now. Let's get to it.
Starting with Part 1, the broken castle model.
Think back to 1995 for a second. The perimeter? Crystal clear. People were in static offices and data was sitting safely on premises in a freezing cold server room. A giant firewall made total sense. But jump to 2025? It's completely perimeterless. Employees are working from coffee shops, airports, their couches. Data is scattered all across the cloud. You literally can't build a wall around a coffee shop Wi-Fi connection. The whole working environment flipped completely. But crazy enough, a lot of networks are still partying like it's 1995.
And because of that outdated mindset, we get hit with this reality: 70%. I really want you to let that sink in. 70% of breaches involve lateral movement. So the attacker isn't just smashing the wall and grabbing the first thing they see.
No, they get inside, maybe someone clicks a bad phishing link on their laptop, and because everything inside the castle is blindly trusted, they just casually stroll from that laptop to your file server and boom, right into your customer database. And oh, it definitely gets worse. Over 200 days. That is the average time it takes to even detect a breach. For over half a year, attackers are just hanging out inside your trusted network, roaming freely, quietly sneaking your data out the back door, completely undetected. Why? Because the legacy system just assumes anyone inside is supposed to be there. The perimeter failed, and the internal network just handed them a VIP pass.
Which brings us to Section 2, the 7 Zero Trust Principles. This is the big paradigm shift right here. We've got never trust, always verify, least privilege access, assume breach, continuous verification, device trust and compliance, micro-segmentation, and identity-first security. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here, these 7 principles are tightly interconnected. You can't just pick 2, patch them in, and call it a day. Going halfway gives you basically zero benefit. You have to assume the attacker is already in the house and use all these layers together to stop them cold. Let's zoom in on a couple of the really critical ones.
First up, microsegmentation. Instead of one big castle wall with a soft, squishy center, think of it like building heavily guarded vaults inside of other vaults. You're chopping your network up into tiny, super isolated segments. The web servers can talk to the app servers, but absolutely nothing else. Finance is completely cut off the marketing. If an attacker breaches one segment, bam, they hit another reinforced vault door immediately. It makes that lateral movement we just talked about agonizingly slow and super easy to detect.
Then there's least privilege access. This is all about giving users the absolute bare minimum access they need to do their specific job. Nothing more. So take Sarah, a sales engineer. She needs Salesforce and Google Drive, right? Does she need access to the GitHub code repos or the AWS production servers? No way. Even if the dev team does, she doesn't. So if Sarah's account gets compromised, the attacker only gets Sarah's limited access. You're severely shrinking the blast radius of the attack.
Moving right along to Section 3, Zero Trust in Practice. Let's take this out of theory land for a second. Imagine a user just trying to access a customer database. In the old days, if they were on the network, they were golden. But in Zero Trust, the system fires off this continuous verification checklist in literally milliseconds. First, are they who they say they are? Check the password and MFA. Second, does their role actually authorize this exact action? Third, and this one is huge, is the device healthy? Is the laptop fully patched, encrypted, firewalls on? And fourth, is this a normal access pattern? Or are they suddenly logging in from halfway across the world at 3 a.m.? Even if a hacker steals the password, they're going to fail the device health or location check and the door slams shut. Let's look at how the big players handle this. A traditional VPN, it gives you a single access point. If a hacker breaks that VPN, they literally hold the keys to the entire kingdom. Google saw this massive flaw over 10 years ago and just ditched the VPN entirely with BeyondCorp. Instead, every single application sits right out on the open internet but requires incredibly strict application-level authentication based on user identity and device health. Zero broad network trust and no massive single point of failure.
All right, Section 4, the implementation roadmap.
Look, you can't just buy Zero Trust in a box. It's a full-on architectural shift, a multi-year journey. Here's a realistic blueprint. Months 1 and 2, you're just assessing your assets and planning. Then, months 3 through 6, identity and access. Listen carefully, this is absolutely foundational. If you don't get centralized identity, MFA, and least privilege lockdown right here, the rest of the plan is going to fail. Period. Next, you tackle device trust around month 6. The heavy lifting really hits between months 9 and 15 with network microsegmentation. Then you're building out monitoring and detection. And finally, past month 18, it's all about continuous automation and optimization. It's a massive shift.
But hey, the good news is you don't have to start from scratch here. You can totally piggyback on established, proven frameworks. The absolute gold standard right now is NIST 800-207. It's detailed, technical, and super authoritative. You've also got the broader NIST cybersecurity framework, Google's BeyondCorp model, and native models straight from AWS and Azure. Use these as your North Star so you aren't out there reinventing the wheel.
Finally, Section 5, why Zero Trust now?
Why is this suddenly the biggest mandate in enterprise security? Well, the business case is frankly undeniable. Organizations running Zero Trust are seeing 63% fewer data breaches. Their threat detection speed is 70% faster. And that lateral movement problem we talked about, slashed in half.
So this isn't just some abstract theoretical exercise. This is an ironclad business strategy. The risk reduction is literally too big to ignore.
And it's not even just about defense either. It's about operational speed. With Zero Trust, your actual users get secure access 80% faster. So you're building a system that's mathematically way harder to hack, blazing fast at catching threats, and actually much smoother for your own team to use. Relying on legacy systems? It's just not an option anymore. If you aren't doing this, you're pretty much deliberately choosing to be an easy target.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a pretty terrifying illusion that a lot of organizations share, the illusion of perfect access controls. You might think your systems are locked down tight, but we're going to explore why your access audits might actually be practically worthless, and, more importantly, how to fix them before they turn into a massive liability for you. So picture this scenario. Your org has what you believe to be absolutely flawless access controls. Everyone has exactly the permissions they need, nothing more, nothing less. Your CTO is totally confident, your security team, fully confident. You are ready. But then an auditor walks into the room, takes one look at your setup, and asks one simple, devastating question. Can you prove it? And well, everything changes in that exact moment. Because fast forward just 3 hours later, and suddenly you are in an absolute panic. You and your team are frantically digging through like 6 different final version 2 spreadsheets just trying to figure out who actually has access to what. You start realizing the documentation is incredibly outdated. Some of your critical systems don't even have audit logs enabled. And just like that, it hits you. Your perfect access control system looks like a total disaster to this auditor, purely because nobody actually has the evidence to back it up. Let's look at Section 1, the Great Divide. Access control versus identity governance. Okay, we really need to break down this comparison because this is where the confusion usually starts for most teams. Look at the technical implementation. Things like setting up your firewalls or your Active Directory. That is merely access control, but the verified proof, your quarterly reviews, and the actual evidence, that is governance. Having the control in place is an entirely different beast from proving that the control actually works. So the defining difference is really this. Identity governance is the business framework, the processes and the controls that ensure the right person has the right access to the right resource at the right time for the right business reason. And the absolute most crucial part of that whole definition, with verifiable proof. Organizations that truly get this fundamental definition, well, they sleep incredibly soundly at night. But those that don't, they're honestly just one step away from catastrophic regulatory violations. Which brings us right into Section 2, regulatory reality, and the true cost of failing these audits. Because regulators are definitely not playing around anymore. Look at what's at stake across these different frameworks. They don't just want controls, they demand irrefutable evidence. Under GDPR, if you fail to prove control over EU data, you're looking at fines up to 4% of your global revenue. Under HIPAA, lacking documented access reviews gets you a direct violation finding, and if you're a SaaS company going for SOC 2, you literally need 6 to 12 months of historical evidence showing your controls work. Without that governance in place, it is an immediate, zero exceptions audit failure. Let's move on to Section 3, the identity lifecycle, managing access from hire to fire. To actually generate that required evidence we just talked about, you have to control the entire lifespan of an employee's identity within your systems. We can break this journey into 4 critical phases. First up is provisioning. So when someone's hired, their role automatically dictates their initial documented access. Second, access reviews. This is the ongoing heartbeat of governance, where managers regularly answer stuff like, does Alice actually still need production database access? Third is modifications, tracking role changes. And finally, deprovisioning, shutting off access when they leave. And remember, every single one of these steps has to generate a clear audit trail. But here is where it all tends to fall apart. Phase 4, deprovisioning. In poorly governed organizations, it takes an average of 28 days to remove a user's access after they've been terminated. Wait, 28 days? Think about that for a second. That is almost a full month of an ex-employee just walking around with the keys to your kingdom, instead of the mere hours, or let's be real, minutes, it actually should take. And the financial impact of that specific lag time is absolutely staggering. The cost of a deprovisioning failure, meaning a breach that happens purely because an ex-employee or a contractor kept access they shouldn't have had, averages $4.2 million per incident. With numbers like that, it's really no wonder we see statistics like this. Because of these massive governance gaps and dangling access rights, 63% of all breaches directly involve compromised credentials. If you aren't governing your identities, you are literally leaving the front door wide open. Attackers don't even have to hack in anymore. They just log in. But hey, this chaos isn't just an external hacker risk. It leads to an astonishing 35% failure rate in SOC 2 compliance audits, entirely due to access control and identity governance issues. Remember that auditor from earlier?
You could have the most world-class encryption and perimeter security on the planet, but if you can't prove who has access to your data, you fail the audit. Simple as that. All right, Section 4, Certification and Audit Trails. Let's talk about creating that irrefutable evidence.
So to avoid becoming part of those failure statistics, you absolutely have to implement strict certification and attestation workflows. Certification forces an authority figure to formally review and sign off on access. You need manager-based certification, where managers periodically vouch for their own team's access. You need system owner certification, where the person running, say, the financial database confirms exactly who has admin rights. It's all about creating total accountability. Every single permission in your system needs to be traced back to a specific decision maker who explicitly said, yes, I approve this.
But certification is only half the battle, right? You also need comprehensive logging. You've got to capture authentication events, permission updates, access requests, what was approved or revoked during reviews, direct admin changes, and those all-important deprovisioning actions. And crucially, you must centralize all of these fragmented logs into a SIEM system. By pulling the whole shebang into a centralized security hub, you can instantly generate a single, cohesive report showing the auditor exactly who changed production access over the last year, who approved it, and why.
Which leads us nicely to Section 5, the path forward, from chaos to compliance. How do we actually get there? Well, first, you have to stop making these incredibly common mistakes. Please ditch the manual Excel spreadsheets immediately. They are version controlled and they are certainly not auditable. Stop doing sporadic access reviews that have zero consequences. If a manager revokes access during a review but it doesn't actually get removed in the system, that is literally just security theater. It's totally useless. And never ever forget to disable a contractor's credentials the exact moment their project ends. Instead of all that, follow the structured path. Start right now today by simply documenting your current access landscape. Where do your identities actually live? Next, implement and firmly enforce strict quarterly manager reviews. Then, build out formal provisioning workflows and centralize your audit trails. And finally, when you are ready to scale elegantly and ditch the manual tracking for good, invest in automated enterprise governance tooling like Okta or SailPoint. I want to leave you with this final thought. As you reflect on the frameworks and risks we've unpacked in this explainer, take a critical look at your own organization right now. If an auditor walked through your front door today, sat down right at your desk, and asked you to prove your access controls are working, how much could you actually prove? It is a huge question, and one you absolutely need to be able to answer before they ever have to ask it.